Halloween. It's a holiday where people dress up to show off their creative or unique style and celebrate with some spooky fun. But on this Halloween, someone dressed up for a sinister reason because they wanted to hide within a crowd of people and carry out a gruesome crime at the most evil time of the year. Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Kimbyrleigha, and if you've never been here before, it's nice to finally meet you. Today we don't have a sponsor, so in those cases, I would just like to say if you want to support me, my family, me and my husband, everything we're doing on both channels, you can check out our merch store below. I will leave the link. And of course, if you want to come meet us in person, we will be at CrimeCon this year, and I have a discount code for you as well. So I will leave all that in the description box, but let's get into today's video. This story is about a mother of four who was living in Brandon, Florida. This is a town not too far from Tampa. I'm from Florida. If you are, let me know in the comments. And her friends called her flawless. She was very loving, busy, social. She put her faith in God. She worked hard as a single mama and was thriving until one horrific an unimaginable tragedy that happened on Halloween night in 2015. But before I get into how she died, I want to tell you how Tiffany James lived and who she was, because I could personally relate to her so much, and I'm sure a lot of you will as well. Tiffany James was born in Tampa, Florida on August 18th of 1980 to her mother Rosalind James and father Turner Humphrey. But Tiffany didn't end up being raised by either one of her parents. Instead, she went to live with her maternal grandmother, Beulah James, and therefore, she kept her mother's last name James instead of her father's last name Humphrey. Her father actually moved out to Gainesville, and eventually he started a new family with his new wife, and that meant new half-siblings for Tiffany. But Tiffany and her siblings wouldn't get to meet one another until way later in life. When Tiffany was a teenager, she began living with one of her aunts, Vicki Pittman, and she was like a second mother to Tiffany. Her other auntie, Barbara James, was also very involved in her life. And Tiffany graduated from Hillsborough High School, and that same year, her life changed in a very dramatic way, but in the best way possible. On July 26, 1998, she and her boyfriend, Derek Andrews, welcomed their very first son, Derek Jr. Tiffany was only 18. She was still navigating the transition from being a teenager to becoming an adult, but she stepped into the role of motherhood with grace and with dedication. 4 years later, in April of 2002, Tiffany and Derek welcomed their second son, Darian, into the world. Though she was raising two young boys, still finding her footing in life, it was no easy task, but Tiffany's love for her children made them her very first priority. And over time, unfortunately, the romantic relationship between Tiffany and Derek naturally came to an end, as a lot of young love often does. But Tiffany was able to keep things amicable with her ex for the sake of their boys. She and Derek remained committed to co-parenting and working together to give Derek Jr. and Darian the stability and support that they needed, ensuring they would always feel cherished by both of their parents, even though their paths had diverged. Tiffany was juggling a lot, but luckily, she had a big family willing to help. They would watch her kids while she went to school, and she went back and enrolled at Remington College. This was a trade school, and Hillsborough Community College, where she studied to become a licensed cosmetologist and esthetician. She was hoping to open her very own salon one day. It was actually the fact that Tiffany hadn't grown up with her own mother and father around that made her strive to be present for her own children. The struggles she had made her understand the importance of parental support, and she wanted to make sure her sons always had someone to rely on. That really showed in how much she did for her boys. They were involved in sports. She made sure they were getting good grades, and she instilled her faith in both of them. Tiffany believed in God, and her belief system was a big part of her life, how she viewed the world, and the way that she treated other people around her. After finishing her studies, Tiffany landed a job at a doctor's office for a while, and things seemed to fall into place. Her career was off to a good start. Her boys were growing up healthy and happy, and life felt stable. But deep down inside, Tiffany yearned for more. She longed for a loving partner, someone she could rely on, build a future with, and create the kind of family she always dreamed of, one that she didn't necessarily have for herself. For Tiffany, it wasn't just about romance. It was about finding the right man who could bring stability, love, and be a father figure and role model in her boys' lives. In 2007, Daryl Williams entered her life and everything changed. Daryl was exactly what Tiffany had been looking for, a mature, dependable man with life experience. He was already a father to older children. He knew how to care for kids and understood the responsibilities that came with being a parent. At 14 years, her senior, Daryl brought a sense of calm and steadiness that Tiffany hadn't found in her previous relationships. She actually liked that he was a little bit older. It made her feel secure, like she finally met someone who would not let her down. And Tiffany fell quickly for Daryl. He was attentive, supportive, and kind. He was the missing piece that she had been searching for. Their relationship moved very quickly, and Tiffany couldn't help but imagine the future that they could build together. At 27, with 30 just around the corner, Tiffany dreamed of marriage and a life where she could raise her sons and maybe even expand her family. She knew that Daryl was the one, and she hoped that they would make it official by getting married. But life had its own surprises in store for them. That same year, Tiffany received unexpected news. She was pregnant. And not just with one baby, but twins. The news left her stunned, but also excited. And what a blessing. 2 little girls coming into the world. Though the pregnancy was unexpected, it felt like fate was giving her a chance to build the family she always wanted. And Daryl, being equally surprised, couldn't believe it, but stood by her side, ready to embrace the challenge together, and even proposed to Tiffany. It was an exciting time in their lives, and for Tiffany, it was the beginning of a new chapter. Tiffany gave birth to her twin girls, Diamond and Zanaya, in the spring of 2008, and from the moment that they entered the world, they became the light of her life. These little girls were not just cute. They were the kind of kids that make you stop in your tracks and have to say how adorable they were. And with a mother like Tiffany, who had an eye for fashion and a natural sense of style, the twins always looked like they had stepped right out of a children's boutique catalog. Tiffany made sure to dress her daughters to impress, always wearing the cutest matching outfits. Their hair was always styled to perfection, whether it was bows, braids, headbands, buns, or playful ponytails. Tiffany made sure her little girls looked their best every single day, and I don't know how she did it. I can hardly dress myself, and I only have one new baby. Her daughters were not just her pride and joy. They were Tiffany's motivation, her reason to keep pushing forward no matter what challenges life threw at her. Anyone who saw them could see how much she loved and cared about her children. Tiffany poured everything she had into raising them. Together, Diamond and Zanaya were Tiffany's mini-me's. They were little reflections of their mother's love, style, and spirit. Tiffany was beautiful. As I said, her friends called her flawless. She was always well put together. The clear skin, the beautiful hair, everything was so on point. Her outfit, she would pair everything with these blue contacts, and she just knew how to make anything look good. She had a playful but professional side as well, and eventually she began working as a student recruiter at a school called Ultimate Medical Academy. This was a school that offered degrees in the medical industry. Her work family was like her home away from home. She bonded with the girls that she worked with, and they became not only friends, but like sisters to her. And that's just who Tiffany was. Someone who was always there to celebrate not only her own accomplishments, but the milestones her friends and loved ones achieved as well. She would be there at your graduation, cheering you on. She would encourage you if you were feeling down, always posting words of affirmation to her Facebook and helping to build others up. One quote she posted said, "Whoever's trying to bring you down is already below you." As Tiffany's little family was growing, she was about to add 4 more family members to the mix. I told you in the beginning that she had half siblings. Well, eventually, when her own daughters were just a couple years old, Tiffany's father finally told his children that they had an older sister. And Tiffany was introduced to her 2 half-sisters, Tarina and Serena, and her half-brothers, Turner and Darrell. Now, Tiffany and Darrell really connected. They kept in touch, and Darrell actually looked towards Tiffany whenever he needed anything, whether it was just advice, or he wanted to confide in her about something, or Tiffany was just giving him that sisterly encouragement. Her half-sisters were also excited because they didn't grow up with a big sister. So this was all very new and exciting and fun. And soon Tiffany and her 4 kids were making trips up to Gainesville to celebrate holidays, birthdays, and events with her brothers and sisters and their families. Even though Tiffany had gained new relationships, the one with Daryl wasn't strong enough to stand the test of time. And after about 5 years together, they decided to go their separate ways. By 2012, Tiffany was a single mom again, but it seemed like she was stronger than ever. She moved into an apartment of her own in Providence Lake's apartment complex at 1807 Chapel Tree Circle in the town of Brandon. She also got a new job. She was working as a hairstylist at a local salon. She'd promote her services on Facebook and Instagram under the name Tiffany Hair Royale. She posted a graphic that had those check boxes, I'm sure you've seen them, on the left side, and it would say single taken, and hers would say, or busy doing hair, and it was checked off as busy doing hair because that is what Tiffany was focusing on. Her clients loved her. They looked forward to their appointments, and Tiffany loved making them look and feel their best. As a matter of fact, Tiffany was even asked to offer her time and services at the Look Good, Feel Better class for women with cancer. This is a workshop that's led by licensed cosmetologists who do in-person workshops to help women with cancer manage their appearance-related side effects of their cancer treatments. Tiffany was so proud and honored to be a part of this cause. Tiffany had also started attending networking events, specifically one called SWAT, or Successful Women Around Tampa. She would take her kids to church on Sundays at Rivers of Life Ministries, and the twins even attended Villa Madonna Private Catholic School. The tuition there is not cheap. Nowadays, it's over $7,000 per year per student, and I'm not sure what it was back in 2013, but Tiffany worked hard to make sure the girls were getting a quality education. They were also in cheerleading, and the boys played sports as well, and they maintained good grades. Tiffany even posted Derek Jr.'s high school report card to her Facebook, showing off what a great student he was. She said, quote, "My baby just keeps making his mama proud. First year in high school, and he still managed to keep his 3.0 GPA, play sports, and participate in extracurricular activities. Then he told me, 'Mom, this is just the beginning. I'm shooting for a 4.0. And I replied, "The sky's the limit, baby." She thanked the Lord for blessing her with awesome kids and said that failure is not an option for her or in her house. Tiffany even got a personal trainer. She was working out on a regular basis at the gym. And when she wasn't working on her career or herself, any extra time she had, she spent with her kids. Either time at home with them, taking them bowling, to the circus, the fair, out to eat lunch or dinner, anything to make them smile. She posted a quote along with pictures of all of her kids that said, "Successful mothers are not the ones who have never struggled. They're the ones who never give up despite the struggles," with the caption, "My motivation and inspiration." Somehow, juggling all that she did, Tiffany still found some me time, which often just meant watching an episode of Criminal Minds and having a strawberry margarita. That sounds like fun to me. She called it priceless, and she hashtagged, "This is the good life." I'm sure a lot of us can relate. Sometimes it's just the little things. Other times, she would make a whole night of it and go out with her girlfriends and look fabulous while doing it. When the twins were at their dad's house and her girls had a little more free time, they would get dressed up and have a night out on the town. But of course, Tiffany was feeling that familiar feeling like her life wasn't complete without a partner to share it with, a man. So she was looking for Mr. Right and was hopeful that she would meet someone that matched her ambition and her dedication to her family. But she wasn't interested in settling. Just like her Facebook post from February 10th, 2014 said, "It's better to be single with high standards than in a relationship settling for less." In the meantime, though, she was enjoying the single mama life, and that kept her busy enough. In March of 2014, Tiffany celebrated the twins' birthday at the Nickelodeon Hotel in Orlando. Then in March, it was Darian's 13th birthday. Her Aunt Vicky and her husband came out to celebrate with the family. Tiffany went all out for birthdays and celebrations. She got a custom Nike sneaker cake and a matching custom balloon set for her son. And they all sat at this long table on the upper balcony area of Maggiano's Italian restaurant. It was such a great time. Even Tiffany's grandma came, even though she wasn't feeling well, the one who raised her. She said she wouldn't miss it for the world. Tiffany posted pictures from that night saying, quote, "God favors me and mine. Thank you to all of my family and friends that came out for Darian's 13th birthday dinner. He was extremely happy, and that's all that mattered to me. One monkey don't stop no show. The show went on with those that mattered the most," end quote. So what I'm assuming from this post was someone either didn't come as expected or tried to ruin their evening somehow. It doesn't say who she was referring to by giving the emoji of a monkey. It could have been Darian's father, Derek. I'm not sure. But either way, Tiffany didn't let anyone spoil the evening. Tiffany and the kids had a really fun spring break after this, and she spent one night on a casino cruise with all of her friends and a girls' night out. She had a dinner with the twins, and then she went jet skiing with her sons. In June, Diamond and Denaya had their kindergarten graduations pictures taken, and that same month, Tiffany's father actually got together with her and the kids, so the summer was off to a great start. In July, the twins wore matching blue caps and gowns and officially completed their kindergarten year. They posed for really cute pictures with their brothers standing behind them. It's really hard to believe, with so much love and happiness, that it was all going to be destroyed. Tiffany's next summer would be her last, but there was no way anyone could have predicted that. That August, Tiffany turned 34, and by the spring of the next year in 2015, she had her own hairstyling business at Pure Elegance Beauty Lounge, telling her Facebook friends to like her new business page. Tiffany was offering professional hairstyling as a certified hair loss specialist. She specialized in celebrity hair extensions for all hair types, elegant and classy styles, natural hair, relaxers, custom hair coloring, healthy hair maintenance, eyelashes, and even makeup. This was the beginning of Tiffany's dream of owning her very own salon one day. She was one step closer, and even closer to another dream as well. That summer 2015, she bumped into an old friend. And for clarity, we are going to be calling him Ben, because I don't want this to get even more confusing. We already have a Derek and a Daryl and a Diamond and a Denaya. So Tiffany and Ben reconnected. He was someone she was already familiar with, so there wasn't really that weird, awkward stage where you have to kind of break the ice at the beginning of a new relationship. And Ben was also a single parent. The two of them could relate to what that was like. They started off as friends, but soon things progressed and then they were officially dating. I noticed during this time, Tiffany was posting a lot less on Facebook. There wasn't many photos of her and the kids or her new man. It was mainly quotes and a lot of illustrations of a lion, and this was because she was a Leo. She did, however, post on Instagram a few times alluding to spending time with her boyfriend. One picture was of him and her with their heads together. He was kind of like kissing her neck, but he wasn't showing his face. I think she was still kind of taking it slow before showcasing her new boo. But on October 1st, 35-year-old Tiffany changed her cover photo on Facebook to a picture of a man and a woman's hands clasped together on top of a Bible, wearing wedding rings and matching Rolex watches. This, I was guessing, was an inspirational picture, something she could look forward to because we know Tiffany is a woman of God. She wants a forever type of love rooted in faith, but she also wanted to prosper. This was a perfect example of her goals. And someone even commented that her finger was stuck on the love button. Those close to her knew that she was in a good place with Ben, and Tiffany had a lot of hope for the future, but we know that her life will be cut short, and all the dreams she had for her life would end at the hands of a monster. Gearing up for Halloween, the twins picked out their costumes for trick-or-treating. The year before, they went as Supergirl and the other as a zebra. And forgive me for not being able to tell them apart. They look identical to me. But this year, one of them went as a police officer and the other was a fairy, and they looked adorable. Since they lived in an apartment complex, and generally that's not the best place for trick-or-treating, the plan was to get together with friends and go to a nearby neighborhood to collect candy and spend some time together before heading back home. Tiffany snapped a picture of the girls and posted it to her Instagram with the caption, "Happy Halloween," before the trio got into Tiffany's car and headed out. Brandon, Florida attracts a lot of families. It has affordable living, great public and private schools, safe neighborhoods, and the crime rate is below the national average. It's a place where residents feel safe walking down the street at night, especially on a holiday like Halloween, when hundreds of people are in the streets going door to door for some treats. If you look at a bird's eye view, this is a very residential area. Homes all around, close to where Tiffany lived. It was bound to be a fun night for everyone. But let's jump to around 11 p.m. later that Halloween night. A woman living in the Providence Lakes apartment complex a few doors down from Tiffany was settled in on her living room couch, engrossed in a marathon of horror movies, which made what happened next even more eerie and unsettling. Out of nowhere, there was a thunderous boom that echoed through the walls of her apartment, which snapped her right out of being fixated on the screen of the TV. She realized it was someone banging on her front door. Before she could jump up and look out the peephole, the door suddenly burst wide open with a startling force and slammed against the wall. This was terrifying. It's Halloween night. It's dark. She's watching horror movies. She inched near the opening, curious to find out what was going on. When she cautiously peeked out, she couldn't believe what she was looking at. Right there outside her front door was a figure straight out of a horror movie. It was a person dressed head to toe in black, wearing a white hockey mask, just like Jason Voorhees, the villain in the Friday the 13th movies. But it was how he was looming over someone else who was lying on the ground that was so horrifying. It seemed like more of a nightmare than real life. Before this neighbor could process what was happening, she noticed something else. What looked like a gun in the figure's hand. She was gripped with fear, so she grabbed her door and she slammed it shut. As soon as she was inside, she heard the first bang ring out, the unmistakable sound of gunfire. She was frozen in place, hiding on her floor of her apartment, and then 2 other shots rang out, back to back. She could not believe that this was happening at her house, in front of her door. It was common for someone to knock on your door on Halloween night, opening it up to see a person in costume, but this was like nothing she could have ever imagined. This wasn't a Halloween prank or someone tricking her. It was real. After it had been quiet for a few minutes, the woman heard a gentle tapping on her door. She was scared, but at the same time concerned, because she could also hear what sounded like whimpering. Could it have been this wounded person on the other side? She didn't know. So she crawled over quietly and cautiously looked out her front window. And that is when she saw a familiar face. It was one of her neighbor, Tiffany James's 7-year-old twin daughters, knocking on her door. She went over and she slowly opened it up. And that's when she noticed that the little girl was covered in blood. And the neighbor looked down and realized the person on the ground, bleeding profusely now, was Tiffany James. The neighbor quickly grabbed the little girl. She pulled her inside to safety, closing the door and locking it behind them. This is unbelievable. Can you imagine yourself in that moment? It's nothing you would ever expect. But then, just moments later, there was yet another knock on her front door. And again, the neighbor looked out to find Tiffany's other little 7-year-old daughter on the other side. She let her in, and then she examined both of them to make sure that they were not harmed. Both of the girls were sadly covered in their mother's blood, but they were thankfully unharmed. But this blood was all over their costumes. It was in their hair. There was even blood in one of little Danaya's ears. Clearly, they had been very close to their mother when she was shot. As the neighbor's trying to wrap her brain around what has just happened, she eventually does, of course, call 911. She and a bunch of other residents of the apartment complex were calling in. Each person had their own account of what they heard or saw. In this heavily populated community like this, with units close together, especially on a night like Halloween, a lot of people were still awake when the shooting occurred, and they had information to provide. Now, we're going to come back to the witnesses, but emergency services and police were on their way. First responders arrived to find a Black female lying on the ground in a pool of blood with significant trauma, and it appeared to be from at least 2 gunshot wounds. The neighbor identified the victim as 35-year-old Tiffany James. She was then rushed to Tampa General Hospital, and of course, a bunch of neighbors are now outside. They're standing around. They're wanting to know what happened. Police are taping off the area with yellow crime scene tape, and they're looking for clues. Emergency room doctors at the hospital could immediately tell that Tiffany had sustained significant wounds and trauma to her head and her upper body. They knew this wasn't from a handgun. It was more like a shotgun. And unfortunately, no matter how hard they tried to save Tiffany's life, she died from her injuries that night. This was a homicide, and the lead detective on the case was Moises Garcia. In his 14 years as a detective, he had never investigated a Halloween homicide. Detective Michael Blair and Corporal Bailey assisted Garcia in canvassing the Providence apartment complex. Both Garcia and Blair were fathers. Detective Blair had actually just been out trick-or-treating with his own children when he got this call to respond to the scene. And Garcia not only had 2 sons close to Diamond and Tadaya's age, they were also twin boys. So this was a very emotional situation for the detectives. It hit really close to home. When the detectives arrived at the neighbor's apartment, They knew this was going to be a very delicate situation since they were going to be speaking with 2 7-year-olds, and one of these little girls couldn't even speak. She was trying, but there were no words coming out of her mouth. They were both in shock. As I know that you can imagine, the first thing that Detective Blair thought while he's witnessing this heart-wrenching situation was that he would not stop until he figured out who did this, who took this mother away from her children. By now, Tiffany's family members were actually showing up at the scene. The heartbreak was palpable, and what made this moment even more devastating was that Tiffany's twin daughters were the ones who called their family members from the neighbor's apartment to tell them what had happened to their mother. It's hard to imagine the emotional weight these young girls had to carry and were forced to convey this tragic news to their family members. When it was time for officers to bring the twins out to safety, they had to take extra precautions. They didn't want the children to see the blood that had stained the ground outside where their mother had just been killed. To shield them from the grim scene, the officers gently wrapped the girls in blankets before guiding them out. For the time being, the twins and their brothers were placed under the care of Beulah James, Tiffany's grandmother, alongside their Aunt Vicky, a temporary arrangement meant to give them care and comfort that they needed after such a traumatic ordeal. Now the crime scene investigators were on the scene. They were taking photos and collecting evidence, and there on the ground was a Louis Vuitton-looking brown handbag with a broken beige strap. It was just a few feet away from where Tiffany's body was found. It's Tiffany's purse, and scattered near its opening was a pile of her belongings, including some cash, coins, a bottle of body mist, a lipstick, a couple lip gloss tubes, Apple earbuds, a small lotion bottle, weave glue, a coupon, her driver's license, a Vaseline lip gloss pot, a comb, a peppermint candy, a pair of gold hoop earrings, and glasses that Tiffany normally wore. When I saw this picture, my heart sank because it reminded me of the things that most of us would have in our bags, and I could relate so much that it really made me sad, just seeing all of her personal belongings just thrown out like that. There was obviously a struggle of some kind due to the strap of Tiffany's purse being broken and everything flying out, but nothing seemed to be taken from inside, so they ruled out a robbery being the motive for the shooting. This was such a brutal crime, it didn't make sense or match a simple robbery for some cash or even a handbag. They didn't take her car either, so this wasn't a carjacking. Instead, it really seemed like Tiffany had been targeted, especially after speaking with witnesses. But what the detectives did know was that she had been shot with a shotgun. They knew that and could confirm because there were these big yellow shotgun shells on the ground nearby. But there just wasn't a lot of evidence at the scene, so they were relying on witnesses to paint a picture of what happened that Halloween night. One witness said she looked out of her apartment when she heard yelling. She saw the masked man quickly coming up towards Tiffany with her kids right by her side. She even saw the gun, and then she went back inside to call 911, so she only heard the gunshots. She didn't see what happened, but she felt bad for the twins. She was praying that they were going to be okay, that everyone was going to be okay, but Tiffany, of course, was not. Another neighbor said that he and his girlfriend were watching a movie when they heard a really loud sound like a gunshot. So he immediately got up, he stopped the movie so they could sit and listen, and that's when they heard what sounded like a child screaming. Multiple people actually reported seeing a person dressed in black, wearing a Jason mask, running up behind Tiffany and her girls. Others only heard the gunshots and looked out afterward to see Tiffany lying on the ground. Some saw the person fleeing on foot, but no one could tell the ethnicity of the shooter or whether it was a man or a woman. But they were about 5'7" to 6 feet tall, 200 to 220 pounds, and that stature seemed to be of a man. But the community was in shock because just a couple hours earlier, before all this unfolded, there were so many kids right outside enjoying the fun of Halloween. If the shooting had been any earlier, those poor kids either could have witnessed it and been traumatized, or they could have been caught in crossfire. Some witnesses say that they saw a silver-colored vehicle near where the shooting took place, but it apparently sped away right after the first gunshot went off. Detectives had no way of knowing if this person inside the car had been just a witness who got scared, or if they were involved somehow. But the car wasn't seen leaving the entire community until after the person in the Jason mask was fleeing the scene. So detectives are going to wonder if maybe this car was waiting for them, like as the killer's getaway car. The next thing they did was look for CCTV footage, but the parking lot was not equipped with cameras, and no one was able to get down a license plate for that silver car. They were working on building a theory of this murder, and they thought that the killer could have planned and targeted Tiffany, which meant they could have chosen Halloween night so that they would blend in, wearing a costume. They'd be covered by the darkness of the night and wouldn't tip anyone off that they were up to no good because it was Halloween, and they'd be among a lot of other people that were dressed up. Or maybe they wanted to disguise themselves from Tiffany specifically, so it would be easier to ambush her. Of course, it was difficult, but Tiffany's family knew that they needed to give detectives as much information about her as they could. They were all in shock, they were heartbroken, and they were grieving. But the detective's first line of questioning was what Tiffany's normal routine was like, and what was she like, and of course, whether there was any men in Tiffany's life, and if so, if they had any issues with Tiffany. They were informed that Tiffany often worked long hours at her student recruitment job at Ultimate Medical Academy or at the salon. And on the late work days, her aunt Vicky would pick up the twins from school. But as soon as Tiffany would arrive home from work around 7 or 8, the twins were always excited to greet her. Then they would make their way back to Tiffany's apartment. They told detectives everything I've already told you about who Tiffany was and what she was like, but added that she shied away from talking about her problems with relatives. She was the kind of person who liked to try to handle things on her own, her Aunt Vicky said, but the family did what they could to help whenever they knew she was struggling. And sadly, Vicky added another detail, and it was very sad. She explained how Diamond actually fell on top of her twin sister Denia that night to shield her and protect her from the gunshots. That is so extremely brave. In this unbelievable moment that she thought that quickly. But both of these little girls had witnessed the killer shooting their mother, something that was sure to leave a lasting mark on them, forever tainting Halloween night. The detectives were also informed that there were several men in Tiffany's life, but the most significant and recent men that she was involved with were the ones I told you about, Derek Andrews, Daryl Williams, and who I'm referring to as Ben. Two of them were exes, Daryl and Derek, and Ben was the most current boyfriend. There had been issues in both of her relationships in the past with Derek and Daryl, and she was with both of them for about 5 to 7 years each, and she had 2 children with both of them. The 2 boys were with Derek, and the 2 twins with Daryl. Tiffany's family tells investigators that he was the more recent ex, and Tiffany had broken up with him a couple years earlier because she caught him cheating. But they honestly didn't think any of these men would have a reason to kill Tiffany or be capable of such a horrific crime. Detectives still have to rule them out. And you already know, as an avid true crime consumer, intimate partner violence is one of the top reasons why women are killed. The men closest to Tiffany have to be interviewed and fast. Detectives are already at Tiffany's most recent boyfriend Ben's house at 4 o'clock in the morning. And right when they pull up, they're on guard. Because first of all, it's super early in the morning, yet they see a light on and an open garage door outside. And there's a man pacing back and forth. As the officers walk up, they're not sure what to expect. Ben looks up and tells the detectives that he's been waiting for them. That's a really odd thing to say. And that's when detectives notice there's a firearm. It's out of its case. It's within arm's reach of where Ben is. And they can tell he looks distressed and wonder if this is Tiffany's killer. Ben begins to explain that he was notified hours ago about his girlfriend's murder. He got a call from her family and he swore he had nothing to do with it. Instead, he said that he's terrified that he's going to be next and he's afraid for his life and the life of his children, which is why he's standing on guard in his garage, just armed and ready for anything. The detectives asked Ben if he's willing to speak with them about what he knows, and he agrees. And he even agrees to be tape recorded at the time, right there in his garage. He explains that he has an alibi for the night of Tiffany's murder and that all he wants is to get his kids far away from here as soon as possible because he's scared that whoever did this to Tiffany probably had something against her and he was the closest person to her at the time. The detectives can tell that Ben is genuinely upset and fearful and his alibi checked out. He provided the detectives with a timeline of what Tiffany was doing before the killing took place. He explained that he and Tiffany took their kids trick-or-treating together in his neighborhood. She drove over, they set out on foot, collecting candy and having a great time together. He said that Tiffany and the girls actually planned to spend the night at his place that Saturday night since it was the weekend. They were just going to run home, change out of their costumes, and come right back. But after a while, they never showed up. and he called and called Tiffany's phone, but she never answered. So he didn't know what happened until after that night when he got that phone call that she had been shot. The detectives asked Ben if Tiffany seemed on alert or worried about anything that night. And he said, no, not at all. She was happy. She was having a great time with the girls. They were just trick-or-treating. Then they asked if she had any issues with anyone. And Ben said that Tiffany thought that she was being stalked. She was still trying to figure out by who, but Ben says they should check out her exes. Maybe they took issue with her moving on and having a new man in her life. He mentioned that some strange things had happened to Tiffany in the past couple months, and that she was worried that someone was lurking around and possibly trying to scare her or even hurt her. For example, her car started acting up. It just wasn't driving correctly, so she brings it into the mechanic. And that's when they inform her that somebody had poured ammonia into her gas tank. Now, usually if someone wants to ruin an engine, they would actually use hydrogen peroxide. They'd put that in your fuel tank, which could even cause a fire. But ammonia could cause erosion. And according to the mechanic, her car would need to be flushed out, so she had to pay for it because it can do damage to your vehicle. Even that night on Halloween, Ben said that at one point, he noticed a black car with dark tinted windows kind of creeping slowly behind them as they walked through his neighborhood. That doesn't match the vehicle that witnesses say they saw leaving Tiffany's apartment complex, but the fact that Tiffany was worried about a stalker is a lead for these detectives. Except Ben offers one more detail that is chilling, given what the detectives already know about Tiffany's killer. He said that there was a white Jason mask hanging from the black car's rearview mirror. That's weird. That's a big clue. So out of the two exes left to talk to, Tiffany's boyfriend tells detectives he'd lean more towards Daryl than Derek, since he was Tiffany's most recent ex, and they were not on the best terms. They butted heads when it came to the twins in regard to custody and other legal agreements. There was definitely some animosity there. The thing is, those two little girls that were there when their mother was shot were Daryl's daughters. And detectives really don't think a father would put them in such a dangerous and gruesome situation. He wouldn't want them to witness something like that, but they still need to speak to him. The next day on Sunday, November 1st, detectives head out to the last known address of 49-year-old Daryl Eugene Williams, hoping to meet with him and get additional information about Tiffany and his alibi to rule him out. They pull up to 2002 Thornbush Place in Brandon, Florida, which is only about a 5-minute drive from Tiffany's apartment. When they get to the house, there are a couple vehicles in the driveway, a dark-colored SUV, a green sedan, and a gold Toyota Camry. And again, they don't match the car that witnesses said they saw fleeing the scene. But maybe that silver car wasn't involved at all. But just to do their due diligence, the detectives split up into teams, and a couple of them go around the neighborhood asking neighbors what cars are usually parked over at Daryl's. No one mentions a silver vehicle. When the other detectives knock on Daryl's front door, nobody answers, so they decide to wait outside in their cruisers until Daryl makes his way home. But before he does, one of his older daughters walks up the driveway. Before she makes it inside, the detectives stop her and they tell her why they're there. She had no idea that Tiffany had been murdered, so when they give her this news, she nearly drops to her knees. She is so upset, especially when she finds out that her little half-sisters, Diamond and Tanaya, were present when their mother was gunned down. She wanted to know if they were okay, and the detectives let her know that they were unharmed. But what they really need was to speak to her father, since he's someone close to Tiffany. Now, after hearing everything, Daryl's daughter's perception about why the detectives were there was because they thought that maybe her dad was involved, and she wanted to help in any way that she could. So she told them what she's experienced in the past, saying that her father was the type of guy who had to get his way. He was very controlling. She'd seen him become violent, especially towards his romantic partners, and this usually happened when they weren't doing as he expected them to. If you go against him, she said, there would be consequences. She'd even witnessed him pull a gun on her own mother back when they were married before he got together with Tiffany. According to his daughter, Daryl pointed the gun right in her mother's face during an argument. She went on to say that after the relationship between her dad and Tiffany ended, he was not happy. They'd been in and out of court ever since. Before the detectives left, Daryl's daughter let them know that she hadn't spoken or seen her father since earlier in the day on Halloween. The detectives decide to take a trip over to Daryl's workplace at Mosaic Phosphate Plant in Riverview. This was about 15 minutes away in East Tampa. They ask his employer about his work record, what type of employee he is, whether he's got anything of concern on his work record, and of course they explain the reason why they're asking. His boss tells investigators that Daryl is a very hard worker. He's the type of guy who would work a day shift and a night shift, and even pick up shifts when other people would call in. He'd actually be the first person to offer to cover a shift for someone. He did work the day shift on Halloween, but when someone called in to take the night off at the last minute, Daryl declined to pick up that shift, saying that he would not be available. Now, that's not that out of the ordinary. It is Halloween, it's a holiday, he has kids, but it could mean that he had the opportunity to commit this crime. When detectives informed Daryl's boss that his ex-wife has been murdered and they needed to obtain Daryl's alibi, his response was kind of like, oh, I wouldn't be surprised if he had something to do with it. So, of course, this is going to raise a red flag. And they asked him to elaborate. Well, according to his boss, Daryl had been known to be explosive at times. That's their words. He was the type that wasn't afraid to get in your face. He wasn't the most professional employee. He was even known to threaten coworkers when they challenged him on something. He was abrasive, and people tried to actually steer clear of him so they wouldn't set him off. Even the management felt that they were walking on eggshells around Daryl, and they would avoid him at all costs if they could, especially the women in the office. All of his female supervisors expressed the opinion that Daryl looked down on them. He didn't respect them, and he acted as though he was better than them, like he didn't need to listen to what they say. It wasn't uncommon for him to attempt to control the people that were in higher positions, especially if they were women. However, that didn't stop women from getting into relationships with him because he did have good qualities, as we've heard. And detectives were also informed he had a current girlfriend. So this added kind of a new element to their theory. If Daryl had moved on from Tiffany and been a couple years and he was happily in a new relationship, it wouldn't really make sense to them that he would be jealous enough that she was dating a new man to commit a crime like this. But then they were thinking maybe he didn't want anyone getting close to his twin girls. They realized that time is of the essence. I mean, it always is in these cases. So they put out an APB for Daryl's gold Camry. And eventually, later that day, it's spotted in an area of East Tampa, not far from his workplace, in a location called Claremelle. It's a residential area only a few miles away from where Tiffany lived. They run the address of 1717 Windermere Way, and it comes up to a house that's owned by a 38-year-old woman named Rosalind Washington. Detectives make their way over to this house, and outside in the driveway are two vehicles, a gold Camry and a silver sedan. Now, this was the first time that a vehicle had matched the description of the one seen fleeing the scene. This was a silver Nissan Altima. So they knock on the front door. A woman answers, and she identifies herself as Rosalind Washington, the owner of the home. When they ask why Daryl's car is parked in her driveway, that's when she explains that she's his girlfriend. At this point, the detectives are upfront with her. They let her know that they were there to ask Daryl some questions in regard to his ex-fiancée Tiffany James's murder. Rosalind tells the detectives that she doesn't know Daryl all that well because they'd only recently began dating, and he wasn't at her house at the moment. However, she says she was aware that he had an ex and that he shared two 7-year-old twin girls with a woman named Tiffany, and she also knew that she had been murdered. Rosalind explains that they'd been informed early that morning, and Daryl left to go speak with his attorney. Now, it may look suspicious, but then again, both Daryl and Tiffany had legal counsel. We know that because they had some legal matters, according to Daryl's daughter. And now that there's a murder investigation, I think that most people would want legal advice, knowing that the detectives were bound to look into Tiffany's exes. But the detectives also see this as a red flag. They realize it's not a solid indication that someone's guilty. Someone familiar with their rights and the law, like Daryl appeared to be, would know to speak to a lawyer if a murder occurred involving someone close to them. But they hadn't even determined if he was a suspect yet, and they never notified him that he was. Nevertheless, it was obvious that people close to Tiffany were going to be at the top of their list. They tell Rosalind to call them if she has any additional information, and then they leave. But then, about only 20 minutes later, the detectives get a phone call from a criminal defense attorney named Norman Cannella. Now, he introduces himself as Daryl's lawyer and informed the detectives that as soon as he was notified that Hillsborough County Sheriff's Office had come looking for Daryl, he wanted to make them aware that he was in contact with Daryl Williams, and if they wanted to speak to him, they needed to go through him, his lawyer. They were not permitted to speak to Mr. Williams under any circumstances without him present. It's clear that Rosalind probably informed Daryl that the detectives came knocking. At this point, the media went to speak with Tiffany's family members that night, including Beulah James, her grandmother. She said she just didn't understand how this could happen, but she was trusting in God to fix it. I'm going to play this clip for you.
Tiffany James' family heartbroken over her murder tonight, and they want someone arrested.
I don't understand, but God told me that he would fix it.
Tiffany James' grandmother, Miss Beulah James, doesn't want her face shown, but she cannot conceal the sadness over the murder of her granddaughter, a granddaughter she raised.
She is saved, and that's the most important thing to me. And whenever I see her with a smile, like she always would smile.
How sad is that? They also spoke to Tiffany's aunt, Vicky, and they just wanted the killer to be found and arrested.
Her aunt says it's all been too tough to bear.
She was murdered in front of her 2 girls, 7-year-old kids. So it's devastating. We have no closure. No one is giving us any closure.
Then the very next day, Rosalind ends up calling the detectives. This is November 2nd, and she wants to provide additional information about Daryl. Rosalind actually painted a completely different picture of Daryl than what investigators had already heard. Granted, she did admit she hadn't known him very long, but according to her, Daryl was kind, he was loving, and he was a good father. He wasn't controlling or possessive, and most importantly, she insisted that Daryl had no issues with Tiffany James whatsoever. On top of that, Rosalind was adamant that Daryl couldn't have been involved in Tiffany's murder because he had been with her that entire night. When detectives asked her for a timeline of Halloween night, Rosalind walked them through the evening in detail. She explained that Daryl went to work that morning. He came to her house afterward around 7 p.m. They spent the evening sitting outside, handing out candy to trick-or-treaters. The two enjoyed each other's company, having a couple beers, laughing, and relaxing. She described the scene in detail. She even shared how she was sitting on Daryl's lap and they were enjoying the night together. But eventually Daryl got tired, so they decided to call it a night. They packed up the candy, they went inside, and Daryl fell asleep on the couch in the living room. Rosalind was not quite ready for bed, so she ran out to a nearby store to grab some food and to take care of a couple of quick errands. She said she was gone for maybe an hour and a half, and returned somewhere around 9:30 p.m. or 10 p.m. at the latest. And when she got back, Daryl was right where she had left him, asleep on the couch. She stayed home for the rest of the night, eventually falling asleep too, and then waking up around 1 o'clock in the morning, and Daryl was still asleep, right on the couch. Rosalind's account was firm. Neither of them had left the house or gone anywhere near Tiffany's apartment that night. And it was true, she did drive a silver car, but so did a lot of other people. It's a popular color. Actually, gray and silver are the 3rd and 4th most popular car colors, with white and black coming in 1st and 2nd. So with this new information, the detectives are somewhat at a dead end until they can get some more concrete evidence. It's only been 2 days since Tiffany's murder, so you might think this next part is a little insensitive. But without any viable leads, they're desperate, and they asked Tiffany's family if they would be permitted to interview the twins. Now, I can't even imagine how difficult that would have been for them. Their aunt, Vicky, explained that since their mom was shot and killed, both of the girls dreaded nights. They were clinging to her side when stepping out of a car because that's what they had done right before Tiffany was gunned down. They were stepping out to walk to their front door. How sad is that? Something that little girls should be free to do without feeling scared. Now Vicky says they don't want to be left alone and they're haunted by what they witnessed. Rightfully so. The lead detective, Moises Garcia, empathized with Vicky. He explained that he had twin sons and that this case had struck a personal chord with him. He even began tearing up when he was speaking with her about this crime. He was going to do anything he could to bring Tiffany's killer to justice. But they needed the twins' help. The family agreed, and a forensic investigator was brought in to interview the girls of that day. They wanted to hurry because they wanted everything to be fresh in their minds. The twins were brought to the Children Advocacy Center at the Hillsborough Police Department. Now, this is a special building equipped with rooms designed to look like a kid's bedroom, not a police interview room, and that is done on purpose. There are toys for kids to play with, activities for them to do, coloring books, things like that. And that's when they tried to make them feel comfortable just being kids, while at the same time asking them questions in, of course, an appropriate manner. They did separate the girls so that they would not influence one another's perspective and only give them information on what they specifically remembered. When Denaya was interviewed, She was doing a great job engaging with the investigator. They started off talking about fun kid stuff to build rapport and also get her settled in before talking about the night of the murder. But as soon as they went there, this poor little girl just completely shut down. She was crying. She told them she wanted to leave. And I cannot blame her for feeling that way. This is such a tragic experience. And then just so soon afterward, now it was Diamond's turn. And they say that twins can look alike, but have very different personalities. And I think that can be true. Diamond was much more outgoing and talkative, definitely about the generic questions that they had. And then she even ended up being very detailed about Halloween night and what happened to her mother. The investigators were so impressed by how articulate she was. It was almost like she had a photographic memory. She spoke in detail about what she remembered seeing that night. When they asked her if she thought she knew the person who had hurt her mommy, she said she couldn't be sure since she didn't see his face, but she admitted that her dad argued with her mom a lot. But the next fact that Diamond provided was both important but also chilling. She told the investigator that her dad had pictures of the inside of their apartment, Tiffany's apartment, a place that he had never lived before. But not only that, her dad also had pictures of mommy's new boyfriend Ben's house. Wow. Why would he have those? I was thinking, how did this little girl know to provide that information? But I'm sure they were asking all the right questions. But this was huge. Now that Diamond had relayed this information to them, they wanted to see if little Denia would corroborate this. And sure enough, she said she also saw the photos that her daddy had. And she said that her daddy had said he got them from a private investigator. But why would Daryl need a private investigator to look into Tiffany? Well, the detectives began pulling up their court records, and wow, was this a heated custody battle. It was very contentious, but also something that's very common. Both Tiffany and Daryl wanted legal custody of the twins, and they were willing to continue to bring legal motions against one another until they got it. But there was more. The legal reports documented a long, volatile relationship over 7 years. And when they were together, they were both accusing one another of all kinds of abuse. Both of them had requested protective orders against one another, at least twice. And at both times, they were denied. Neither one of them was granted protection. In one of Tiffany's requests from back in 2011, when the two of them started to separate but were still sharing visitation with the girls, Tiffany wrote, quote, "I'm afraid to meet him alone because of all the threats he has made," end quote. She was asking the court for supervision while exchanging the twins. This was ultimately denied. In another petition, Tiffany told the court that Daryl disrespected her older sons, saying that if they died, he would spit on their graves. Tiffany said, quote, "He threatened our life, saying that he will do something to me and my boys and my family would have to prepare for a funeral," end quote. The accusations went back and forth for years, both claiming that the other one was the problem. In August of that year, so just a couple months before Tiffany was killed, it was Daryl that filed a petition of his own. He alleged that Tiffany's family, her relatives, were harassing him with phone calls and threatening to blow his brains out, his words. A judge dismissed this petition because there was insufficient evidence to prove that this really happened. So they couldn't proceed with any legal remedies. So it seemed as though it was just a he said, she said. But it was clear that they definitely disliked one another and they were still at odds in the weeks leading up to the killing. This, coupled with the fact that Ben told investigators he saw a black car creeping close behind them on Halloween night, and there was a white Jason mask hanging from the car's rearview mirror, made Daryl their prime suspect, unless new information was provided to them to rule him out. Maybe he got the private investigator because he wanted to get more evidence to use against Tiffany in court. The detectives began interviewing more of Tiffany's friends and family members, and they believed that Daryl would be capable of harming Tiffany. He actually came up to her work recently and harassed her, threatening her and making her feel unsafe. As a matter of fact, the day before the murder had taken place, like in many cases we've heard about, there was a custody decision being made. That's a huge red flag. This is a prime time for dangerous situations to occur. The court was going to make a final decision in the case on who was going to get custody. And all the evidence provided to the court sided with Tiffany. She was granted full legal custody of Diamond and Denia. And obviously, Daryl was not happy. These cases are always complicated. It's hard to choose between two parents. But in this case, Daryl wanted the twins. because it seemed like he didn't want to pay Tiffany a dime in child support. He had already been complaining about this aspect of the case for a while, and since the twins were only 7, he was looking at being on the hook every month for at least the next 10 to 11 years. The thing is, the twins were not his only children. Daryl had children from previous relationships, and he already owed child support for those kids. So the detectives, they keep on digging, and they uncovered that Daryl owed, just wait for it, $100,000 in back child support already for the kids that he had with different women, not Tiffany. $100,000, just let that sink in. He couldn't get ahead. And there was about to be even more money he owed, not just for one baby, but the 2 babies he had, Diamond and Tanaya. Could this have been a motive for murder? Well, we've seen cases in the past where it has been. I can name so many, but I'm not going to do that. But you already know. Money is a huge reason why someone would be willing to kill someone. If Tiffany's out of the picture, he doesn't have to pay child support. Detective Blair was actually hoping that this was not the case, because these 2 poor little girls had been through so much already. If it was their own father that committed this crime, they would have to testify against him in court, re-traumatizing them, and of course, they would lose both of their parents. The detectives were, of course, going to need more than accusations, though. They needed concrete evidence. So on November 6th, they decided to get a search warrant and subpoena Daryl's new girlfriend Rosalind's phone records so they can pinpoint where she was on the night of Halloween. Now, it does take a few days to obtain those records, so in the meanwhile, they continued to provide comfort and information to Tiffany's family. They were a wreck. Tiffany's grandmother wasn't even sleeping. She would stay up all night long praying for hours and hours that they would find Tiffany's killer. And with Thanksgiving and then Christmas coming up, they were dreading the holidays without the twins having their mother around. I mean, she had 4 kids. Let's not forget, she has the 2 older boys as well. Tiffany's funeral, or going home celebration, as it was called, was going to be held on Saturday, November 14th at 11 a.m. at the new Mount Zion Church, followed by her burial service at Orange Hill Cemetery. Meanwhile, detectives are sifting through Daryl's girlfriend Rosalind's phone records, and her GPS does not put her at home at the time Tiffany was killed. So they already know that she's being deceptive, but it's where her phone was that pointed to a smoking gun. It was at Tiffany's apartment complex. Wow. So now they wondered, had Rosalind committed this crime? Had Daryl actually been sleeping and she left to take matters into her own hands? But then again, her body type did not match the stature of the person the witnesses said they saw running away from the scene. But remember, she does drive a silver car. Witnesses said that it left as soon as the person who shot Tiffany was running away. So had Daryl used Rosalind's car that night without her knowledge? Or was she his getaway driver and involved in this entire thing? By November 21st, the detectives go and pick up Rosalind, and they detain her on suspicion of being involved in a murder. They bring her down to the police station, and they put her in an interview room, which is not as cozy and comfy as her last interview in the comfort of her own home. They were hoping by putting pressure on her, she would tell them what she knows. Garcia first tried to build rapport with Rosalind. He tells her there are 2 little girls suffering, 2 innocent girls who lost their mother. And they're hoping that Rosalind can shed some light on what happened. They don't confront her with her GPS info right out the gate, but Garcia begs her, do not lie to him. She tells him she's being honest, but she knows nothing about Tiffany's murder, so they had to turn up the heat. And Garcia takes out a map, he puts it in front of her, and it has all these dots of the places where her phone had pinged on Halloween. Detective Blair is also present in this interview room, and as Rosalind's reviewing this map, she knows, like, damn, they got a lot of information on me. He and Garcia are letting her know that they know she's not telling the truth. And Blair asked her point blank, what happened on Halloween? Please tell us, because there are 2 little girls that witnessed this. And Rosalind did start to break down. She was hysterically crying so hard, she fell out of her chair, and then she rolled on the floor, and she was curled up in the fetal position in the corner of that room. But it seemed like her reaction was related to what Detective Blair said about those poor little girls, and not because she was going to confess to knowing anything. But Garcia's pushing her, saying, tell us what you know. Let us help you. But Rosalind is incoherent. She's just sobbing and wailing, and she's heard saying, oh God, why? Like over and over again. But she still hasn't said anything incriminating about herself or Daryl. So Garcia blows up on her. He's at his wit's end. He knows that she's lying to them. She knows more than she's telling them. She was there when Tiffany was shot. Her phone puts her there. So he's like, either give up the information or get the F out of my office. Rosalind doesn't open up. Instead, she tells them that she's going to leave. And she's not under arrest, so they have to let her go. But they do inform her that they have obtained a search warrant for her vehicle, so she will not be taking her dark silver Nissan Altima home with her. They took it into an evidence bay, and they started to look inside. They were hoping that they would find something to link the car to the murder, like the mask, some kind of clothing, black, sweatshirt or pants or something. The exterior of the car is perfectly clean. The interior is also fairly clean. It does look used. There's normal dirt and debris on the floor mats, but overall, there's just nothing. There's no visible blood or anything inside this car, except for a pair of work boots with some white substance on them on the floor of the passenger side of the car. In the back seat was more of that white substance on the carpet, as well as a construction hard hat and a pair of safety goggles, as well as some safety harness material, which it looked like belonged to Daryl for his work at the chemical plant. But there's just nothing that stands out to investigators. On November 24th, which is only 2 days before Thanksgiving, the investigators are notified that Rosalind, along with her attorney, she's retained counsel, wanted to meet with them at the police station. She was ready to tell them what really happened on Halloween. She admits that she drove Daryl over to Tiffany's apartment upon his request. She said what she told them about them sitting in front of the house, handing out the candy, that was all true. But then, according to her, out of nowhere, Daryl asked her if she would mind taking him to go do something real fast, not explaining what it was. And she agreed. She said then he instructed where to drive, and she told investigators she had no idea what Daryl was asking her to do. She had no idea what his intentions were. But I'm sitting there thinking, wait a minute, but we're going to get that in a moment. Let me explain first. Rosalind said she got to an apartment complex, and Daryl explained he was going to be waiting for Tiffany to arrive. Rosalind was playing a game on her phone, thinking that maybe they were there to exchange the kids or for him to see their costumes, something like that. But then, when Tiffany's car pulled up, she said that Daryl got out of the passenger seat of the car, put on a white hockey mask, and pulled a gun from his waistband. Rosalind claimed at that point she panicked and she drove off, leaving Daryl behind. She said she wasn't sure what she was going to do, but she said she didn't see anything and she didn't hear any gunshots. She just drove home. But apparently, she said when she arrived, Daryl was already there. She claimed she had no idea how he got back to her house. And I thought this was not making any sense, but I'm not a detective. But first of all, we already know that Tiffany was not shot with a handgun. She was killed with a shotgun. Let's not forget that fact. So you're telling me, I'm speaking to her, you're telling me, Rosalind, that he was somehow able to conceal a shotgun? You didn't see it? How? Especially if he needed easy access to it from the passenger seat of her car. I call BS. Also, multiple witnesses told investigators they saw the silver car leave after at least the first gunshot went off. And thirdly, Rosalind's house was at least 16 minutes away from Tiffany's. If she left in her car and Daryl was on foot without a vehicle, how did he make it to her place before she got home? Correct me if I'm wrong, but it doesn't seem like the story makes any sense. Detectives also know that things are not adding up, but this is all they had. They thought Daryl was guilty, and if Rosalind was willing to testify about what she just told them, it could mean that Tiffany's killer was brought to justice. So they decide to do what they do in these cases, offer her limited immunity, knowing that she was probably afraid to tell them more because she did not want to be implicated in this crime. But that makes me so angry because I'm like, wait a minute. If she drove him there, she would have to be involved. There's no way he could have concealed that gun. But let me finish the story. They needed an arrest warrant for Daryl, and if Rosalind agreed to provide these details without implicating herself, then it would be enough for them to detain Daryl and charge him with first-degree murder. The detectives spoke with the state's attorney's office that afternoon, and they agreed with the deal. So now they had what they needed to make an arrest. But if Daryl did this, he was a very violent and dangerous man, so the officers had to proceed with caution. They found out he was at work that evening, so they decided it would be a safe place to confront him there. The reason why is because this chemical plant had a high level of security. It was right near a port. When he goes in, he has to go through a security checkpoint, so there's no way for him to bring a gun inside. The detectives informed Daryl's boss that they had intentions of arresting him at this facility, and further, they wanted to be undercover when they did so. So the boss provided them with jumpers and hard hats to let them blend in with other employees. So they got to this area where Daryl was. He's like filling out his paperwork and whatnot, and they do a sneak attack on him. They held him at gunpoint and they told him he was under arrest. And of course, this man is taken by surprise, to say the least. But he was cooperative. He didn't say a word. He just turned around, let them handcuff him. And then, of course, he said he wanted to speak to his attorney. But he would have plenty of time to do that. Later that night, Tiffany's family members were notified about Daryl's arrest, as well as all the information that Rosalind had provided up to that point. The news came as a relief. Vicky told investigators that it was like a burden was lifted off of their hearts. They were glad that Daryl would not be walking the streets or able to be free to harm anyone else. Who knows what he was capable of? She added that he would be spending Thanksgiving where he belonged, behind bars. I actually do have a clip from ABC Action News, so I'm going to play it for you.
And the man who is behind bars tonight is the same person detectives questioned initially after this happened nearly a month ago. Tiffany James was almost home after celebrating Halloween when she was shot twice. Her twin daughters, who are 7, saw the brutal murder. Hillsborough County Sheriff's deputies say their father, Daryl Williams, pulled the trigger twice before running away. Tonight, he is charged with first-degree murder with a firearm. As you can imagine, this has been difficult on Tiffany's family, but they told me they received an overwhelming amount of support from the sheriff's office. They say they are thankful for Detective Garcia, Detective Blair, and Corporal Bailey, who kept them in the loop about the case the whole time.
When he told us, I mean, everybody probably in the neighborhood heard us jumping up and just crying. We get honor to God because my mama prayed every night, every night. I'm hearing my mom up all night when my mom is not sleeping. Now that justice is done and he's off the street, we can sleep.
That is sad and it's bittersweet. As Vicky said, now they can at least sleep. Her poor mother, the one that helped to raise Tiffany. She wasn't sleeping because, as I mentioned earlier, she was praying and praying that the killer would be caught. I don't know if they expected it to be Daryl, but when the media caught up with some of the people who knew and loved Tiffany, including her friend Danielle Bailey and coworker Ayanna Harvey, here's what they had to say about her.
Tiffany James had an unforgettable smile, and people saw it every day at work. She was an online admissions representative at a school. Her coworkers were her work family.
You are with the people you work with more than you are with your own family, and that was the case a lot with us.
She was very quiet, but when you got to know her, she was one of her own. She was a very loving person, and she cared about her kids so much, but we're definitely doing what we can to be able to help everybody.
So when they heard Tiffany had been shot twice Halloween night, it hurt them badly. More than a month after she was murdered, deputies arrested Daryl Williams. Tiffany's family says Williams killed the mother in front of their twin daughters.
It's comforting to know that he's off the streets and he can no longer live as a free person.
Because Tiffany isn't here anymore. Her friends hope by talking about the girl they called flawless, other people will open up about domestic violence. Nearly 2 weeks ago, friends and family honored her using her favorite color, the symbol of awareness.
I know we all pray that, we don't have any friends or family that may be going through similar situations, and I just hope that if anybody is, that they're able to talk to someone.
More than anything, her friends want to help Tiffany's family and her 4 children.
I think that's actually a great message from Ayanna, that if you or someone you know is going through a domestic situation, try to talk to someone. I know it's easier said than done, and Tiffany did seek help, at least from the court, but she was denied, like so many other women and men. Daryl was being held at this point without bail on a charge of first-degree murder. In the meantime, detectives decided to bring Rosalind back into the station, hoping that now that she got immunity for her part in the crime, she was willing to tell them everything that happened that night and why. First, she explained that she hadn't told them the whole story because she was scared for her own life after witnessing what Daryl had done, but she was also heartbroken and hurt about everything. She, like so many women before her, really thought Daryl was a good person, someone that she was going to spend her future with. He had a way of making women believe that that was true. At first, anyway. Eventually, Rosalind admitted that she took Daryl over to Tiffany's, and she also was still in the parking lot when he fired the first shot. She said she heard them arguing, and then Tiffany screamed before Daryl pulled the trigger. But the fact that she had lied and already changed her story wasn't going to look good in a courtroom. They were relying on her as their star witness, but as they're building their case, they're nervous about putting her on the stand because of her credibility or lack thereof. Then, there was new information that came out from Daryl himself. Following his arrest, Daryl obtained a public defender, Dana Hentz, and they let the lead prosecutor on this case, Scott Harmon, know that they were planning on painting Rosalind as a liar, a cheater, and a schemer. They had every right to present other theories to a jury, and they intended to because, according to Daryl, there was way more to the story. It wasn't him that killed Tiffany, he claimed. No, it was actually his adult son, Darren Williams, and his mistress, Rosalind Washington. Wait a minute. Yeah, you're hearing that correctly. According to Daryl, his son, his adult son, and his girlfriend were framing him for the murder. I know. Daryl said that he found out his own son was having an affair with his girlfriend, and the two of them came up with a scheme to continue this secret affair and ultimately get all of Daryl's money. After the murder, they were going to pin it on him, and then they were going to liquidate all of his assets. The defense was planning to shift the blame to Daryl's son, Darren, but prosecutor Harmon didn't believe that any of this was true, and he was fighting to stop the defense from bringing this unless they could, in good faith, show that Darren had anything to do with this murder. Otherwise, they should be prohibited from questioning anyone about this aspect of the case or getting into this alternative theory whatsoever. Daryl's defense attorney argued, though, that, quote, any possible motive of whether it was money, whether it was to be in a relationship with his son, it's all motive, end quote, and that they would fight to argue that in court. Well, the detectives, along with the prosecutor's office, they fear that this is going to turn into a circus with these two poor little girls having to witness all of it. And they don't have the physical evidence to link Daryl to this crime. And if the defense ruins Rosalind's credibility, like let's say there is evidence that she slept with his son, their witness is no good. So they decide to offer Daryl a plea deal. This is tough because Tiffany's family wanted to see Daryl spend the rest of his life behind bars, and her Aunt Vicky said, I hope he gets life. He broke up a family. 2 girls lost both their parents. 2 boys don't have their mother. But in order to keep Daryl off the streets at all, they offered him 20 years in prison instead of life if he would plead guilty to Tiffany's murder. This was a man that shot his children's mother in the face with a shotgun in cold blood while she was lying defenseless on the ground. For those who love Tiffany, this did not seem like justice. He would be out when he was 69 years old, still young enough to experience happiness, a future, a life of his own, and he callously robbed that from Tiffany. But the deal went through. One of the hardest parts is not knowing why he did this. He wasn't required to explain his motive at all. So what do you think? Because one of his cellmates claimed that Daryl confessed to him, that he did it because Tiffany refused to take him back after they broke up. And it was a classic case of if he couldn't have her, then no one could. But I don't know. I'm not sure that it's just that, because then there's the money aspect of it all. And that seems like more of a reason to get rid of Tiffany with all the money that he owed already. And then having her just winning in court the day before he killed her. That seems directly connected to her murder, but it could be a little of both. With this plea agreement, Daryl didn't have to answer to why he did what he did. I also have to say I'm not a huge fan or believer in jailhouse confessions coming from cellmates, but it is what it is. Whatever the reason, it seems clear that Daryl did not have any concern for his own daughters. He used a high-powered weapon that could have easily killed either one of them or both. Even just the shell casing could have caused them harm. And side note, Rosalind was not charged for her role in this crime. And when Darrell, who was Tiffany's half-brother, found out about the sentence only being 20 years, it did not seem like justice at all. And Daryl was actually scheduled for release from Jefferson Correctional Institution in 2035. That seems so soon. In the aftermath of Tiffany's murder, her family tried hard to move on, but that holiday was very hard for them. It was the first Thanksgiving and Christmas that Tiffany's 4 children were without their mother. Even Darrell was affected in a way that interfered with him ever being able to enjoy Halloween again. Every year he takes a leave of absence from work for at least a couple days before and after Halloween because he knows it's going to affect him emotionally, and he doesn't want to have a breakdown at work. So you can just imagine how Tiffany's children must have dealt with her murder, especially the twins, knowing that their own father had done that. I want to report that Tiffany's oldest son, Derek, became a firefighter in 2019. I'm not sure if this experience inspired him to go into that career, but I wouldn't be surprised. Tiffany raised strong, intelligent, loving, and beautiful children. And I'm so sad that she's not here to see them thriving. And I thank you once again for listening to Tiffany's story. So many people are going through domestic situations, and so many people are not getting help from courts. If you or someone you know is dealing with a situation like this, I am going to leave resources in the description box. Please be safe.